So let's talk about a very central topic of management consulting, and this is the topic of the workload that you can expect if you work in this industry. Let me share two stories of two projects. So the first story I want to share is of one of my first projects that I had, and this project was a global footprint optimization. And what we had to do was that we had to optimize different production sites all across Europe. And basically I had like 4 to 6 flights per week. So this was my kind of traveling schedule, which, as you can imagine, was pretty tough. So it was a very dynamic project with many stakeholders, different sites, different levels that you have to deal with. And also it was private equity backed. So which meant that, usually if you have a private equity related project, it's a little bit tougher because, it's all about the bottom line. It's all about, creating value. And my typical schedule looked like the following. So I got up almost every day around 5 or 6 latest. Then I had to, get myself ready, had to catch a flight. Then I flew to the location, had meetings the entire day. Very often in the evening, since we had to coordinate so many stakeholders, we had team dinners. And then, late in the evening, I had to do some work like preparing slides or, working on the business case. And I got to bed around 12 or 1 in the night, and sometimes I even had like crazy working hours, where we had to work almost through the entire night to prepare a important presentation. So this was a very, very intensive project, and especially at the end, towards the final presentation, it got pretty tough. And this was, in terms of the workload, probably the toughest project that I have ever had. But let me also talk about a second project that I had in the past year, and this was a digitization project. So it was very different because we were at one location, so there was only little traveling involved. So it was very predictable and easy to plan because we knew all the stakeholders. It was set up, in a very structured way. So it was easy to kind of, predict all the important meetings and predict and plan all the important deliverables. And also the environment, it was in the media sector, was quite relaxed. People were, had a kind of a digital and agile attitude, which made it, a cool and relaxed atmosphere to work in. And there my typical day looked like the following. So I got up, around 7, I would say. Then we started around 8 or 9. And then we, stopped working at, let's say, 6 or 7, had dinner together, and then worked maybe 1 hour in the evening. But that was, that was, all we did actually. So no night shifts, no whatsoever. And we only had peak times when we had to prepare, important presentations like the midterm presentation or the final presentation. Obviously there, or, if we had steering committees in between, this was were times where we had to work a little bit more. But in general, I would say this was very, very relaxed and very, very doable. So why do I tell you those two stories? There are a couple of key learnings that I had in the past 4 years. So first of all is that the actual workload that you have in management consulting highly depends on the type of project that you have, on the client, on the management style of your project manager, on the traveling schedule that you have. So it's, your workload highly depends on many different factors. That's one key learning here. The other key learning is that some projects that you will have will be pretty tough and some will be more relaxed. Okay, so it highly depends on what kind of project you get stuffed. So I know colleagues who only had like very tough projects. I know colleagues who only were on kind of relaxed projects. But most of the colleagues that I have, and me included, have sometimes hard projects and sometimes more relaxed projects. And another learning that I had was that, it's a project-related business that we have in management consulting. And this means that your workload highly depends on the phase of the project that you're in. So there are certain peak times, usually around important presentations, usually around the steer course, or maybe, the mid presentation and the final presentation, where the workload is much more intense. But in between, shortly after the presentations, for example, it should be a bit more relaxed. So there is no constant workload that you have. It's a project based business, so you have the peaks and you have the valleys in terms of workload. So those are a couple of learnings that I had if we talk about workload in management consulting. So now let's talk about the question, what does the typical workload look like in management consulting? And for this, let's take a look at a chart that I prepared. And this is a, illustrative chart, which summarizes my thoughts. And the key message here is that the workload highly depends on a project, and that there are a lot of variations even within a project. So this means, this is, as I said, illustrative. This means that maybe at the beginning, you have a very relaxed phase, then it might be, a bit tougher if you're going towards the mid presentation, then it's gonna be a bit more relaxed again, and then you have another peak around the final presentation. And this is like, a typical workload that I would see across different projects, okay? Highly depending, on the fact if you have mid presentations and final presentations. Sometimes you just have, a couple of steer courses. Sometimes you have very unstructured presentations to the management board, for example, where you have one in the 2nd week and then one in the 8th week and then one again in the 10th week. It highly depends, but the key message is that around those presentations you will have the peaks. And then, it highly depends on the kind of project that you have, okay? But on average, I would say that your average workload will be, or typical workload will be something, between, let's say, 40 to 50 hours up until 60, maybe sometimes 70 hours. In peak times, maybe even 80 hours. It highly depends, as I said, on the project, on the type of industry that you have. So that's it for now in terms of workload. Later on in this module, we will also talk about very concrete numbers about the workload in different companies in the consulting industry. But for now, the two key learnings are that first, your workload highly depends on the type of project, on the management style, and so on. And that it also varies or depends on the kind of project phase that you are in. Usually around very important presentations there will be a peak, but in the rest of the time it will be more relaxed.